So today I'm continuing with my video series on sort of the philosophical side of panning and Atmos and some of my approaches and things I've learned. So if you missed any of the other parts, you can check those out. I'll put a link in the description and there's probably a card. I think it goes over there. I think it's there. So you can check that out, but let's get to it. If you're new to my channel, thank you so much for coming and checking it out. My name is Dave Stagl. I'm a mix engineer based in the Atlanta, Georgia area. You can find out more about me at my website, www.staglproductions.com. There's affiliate links down below that help me out and help support my plugin habits. So if you don't mind checking that kind of stuff out, I would appreciate it, but let's dive in. Now let's start talking about some of the fun stuff with panning. I find right now, in early 2023, there are sort of two main approaches that are being employed by mix engineers when it comes to panning. The first is what I would call the front stage approach, where everything is sort of up front and then you have really kind of ambience behind and around you. The other approach is what I would call the immersive approach, where the instruments are all around you and you are kind of in the middle of it as a listener. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the front stage approach in most instances. I think there are places where it is appropriate. For example, I was recently helping my friend and producer and engineer Trammell Starks here in Atlanta. He was working on a record. I was helping him with the Atmos side of it for the Joel Alterman Trio, which is, it's 3-piece jazz, it's piano, upright bass, and drums. And the music and the artistic intent of the group, it really didn't make sense to kind of try and pull it all around. What seemed to work best for that music, in our opinion, was to have more of the performers up front and to have it feel more like, you know, what if you were seeing these guys in a jazz club and you had the best seat in the house right in the front row and you just feel like you're there with them. That was more what I think worked best for that music. So sometimes that's the way to go. I mean, if you've just got a kind of singer-songwriter, you know, if it's one person and an acoustic guitar or two, I mean, it's not necessarily always going to make sense to try and fly stuff all around the room and spin it around and whirl it around and do all kinds of, you know, crazy effects. That's not going to work for that. On the other hand, a lot of the music that I work on is more in the CCM or modern worship vein, some rock stuff here and there. For that kind of stuff where you have layers and layers of instruments and vocals and just all of this stuff, the immersive approach, I find, is far better and more effective than the front stage approach, because you can get more space and it just feels so much better. When people are working on music like that and they just use this kind of front stage approach, to me it's pretty lame. As a listener and having a surround sound system of some sort for over 20 years now, really even longer than that, when I put on a movie and or concert video or anything where there is stuff and it feels like everything's up front, it's kind of frustrating. You know, if you invested in all of this stuff, you want it to go to use. And I think for people who are investing in technology today, whether it's a sound bar, sort of a traditional kind of home theater setup where it's multi-channel, even somebody who is just going for the binaural, people are checking that out. They want to experience what the technology can provide. And that's kind of my approach to this. It's like, I bought all of these speakers. I'm going to use them as appropriate, but for me, I want to use them as much as I possibly can. I think that's what listeners are going for, and it's just what I think sounds better a lot of the time. So I like the kind of more immersive approach. There's kind of two main approaches I hear, but at the same time, it shouldn't be about that. And honestly, sometimes when I feel like, oh, this is the direction I'm going, a lot of times with Atmos, I just want to go the complete opposite direction, because sometimes you can and sometimes it works. And there are a lot more right answers now, I think, for mixes. I don't think there was ever like any kind of one right way to mix a song, but with Atmos, we have really just kind of multiplied the opportunities. You know, something else I should say about the whole immersive side is, in a lot of ways, I approach it more in terms of a feeling. I want it to feel like you're immersed in the song, but not necessarily thinking like that's there and that's there. It should just feel like you're in it. A lot of the projects I work on are live recordings. And initially I was kind of nervous about how am I gonna do this? Like, can I take something and put it behind me? And then I went and listened to Elliot Shiner's 5/1 mix of the Eagles' Hell Freezes Over. And that's a live recording. And he's got like piano and stuff in back. And I went, okay, man, if Elliot Shiner can do it, I can do it. There aren't really rules. So for me, I just want it to really kind of feel great. And if that means having more stuff up in front, then that's what I'm going to do. But usually it means kind of pulling stuff all around. So let's talk about sort of general placement of things. You know, I teach a mixing workshop I call priority mixing. I do that a lot with houses of worship. And my approach with Atmos, it's almost like priority panning. For me, I like having the important stuff more towards the front. So lead vocals are going to be in front. Drums are going to be up in front usually, or at least, what is the sort of key rhythmic element. I like that more in the front. Bass, definitely going to be in the front. And then I start kind of pulling things around. So supporting things like, something like a keyboard pad, that's going to probably go maybe in the back, maybe up top a little bit. Sometimes I've put strings in the back. I put pianos. I mean, there aren't any rules. But if something is a strong melodic contributor, that for me is stuff that I'm probably going to lean more towards having it in the front. Another way I will kind of think about it is, I don't want somebody to be turning their head constantly because they're hearing things. If you're in a room, if you're in a live performance, that is an immersive experience, but you still have this band out in front of you. I'm just kind of wrapping them all around. But the key people who are in that band, the key things that are a part of that performance or that song, that stuff to me, I want up front. All right, let's talk about a concept called the wall. A lot of engineers talk about sort of the extreme outsides of where you can pan things in Atmos. Like, that is what we call the wall. And there are different ideas about what to do with the wall. Personally, I like to keep just about everything on the wall. One of the things that you have to understand about Atmos and immersive formats right now in 2023 is they don't simulate presence. So I can't pull something closer to the center of that space. It doesn't register as that thing being closer. The technology right now that we are using, it doesn't do distance. So bringing something in closer is just going to basically put it into more speakers. And I think I talked a little bit about this in another video, but I just think you get a cleaner, more direct localization of a sound when you really put it into one speaker. One place where I am experimenting with things right now, though, is in regards to the lead vocal. And it's really more about translation. Something I've been noticing in mixes I do is when I get the vocal right in my room, a lot of times it translates really well to the Dolby binaural, which is what you'd experience on Amazon, what you'd experience on Tidal. We don't know what Spotify is going to do yet when they go to Atmos, but likely that binaural version is going to show up in Spotify as well. So the translation between my room and that binaural, it feels really good to me. When it goes over to Apple Spatial Audio, though, it's frustrating. I'm just going to be honest right now. This is not a perfect translation, and it drives me nuts a little bit because now my vocal that I spent a bunch of time trying to get sitting right where I think it should sit, I'll go over to Apple Spatial and it's too quiet and it just doesn't feel the same anymore. So one of the things that I know some different engineers are doing is they're experimenting with some different things in the Atmos panner where you can, start bringing it a little more into the room, taking it off the wall. One example of where some of this has been happening, if you listen to the Harry Styles record that Mike Miller did, that vocal, it's not just in the front, it's in the side speakers as well. I'm not exactly sure how he's doing this. There are some different ways of doing it. You can bring it off the wall. You can add size. That's kind of what the size control does in the panner, is it spreads things out into more speakers. There's some different ways of doing it, but that's one place where I've been experimenting with sort of bringing something off the wall. The challenge, though, is how to bring it off the wall and have it work in Apple Spatial, but not change what's going on in the speakers side of Atmos so that the vocal still sits there where I want it to sit, and also in binaural, because sometimes when you start playing around with that, it gets louder in the Apple Spatial, but it also gets louder in the binaural, and it gets louder in the full Atmos in speakers, and that's not what I'm looking to do. I mean, I could just do that with a fader. So that's one of the things I'm playing around with. I think I've landed on a way of doing it now that I like, but not something I'm necessarily ready to sort of talk about. I'll just say the size control might be my friend on this. So we'll see. It's one of those things where I may walk back a year from now doing this because, the Apple Spatial technology, that is changing. My hope is that they're going to update that and continue to modify it so that this isn't a thing and I can just put the vocals where they sounded great in my room and they sounded great in binaural and not worry about Apple Spatial. But that's it's one of those things right now that I think a lot of us are wrestling with, is how do we handle Apple Spatial in terms of the rest of sort of the Atmos landscape? Because Apple Spatial, it's important to us right now, but eventually I don't know that it's going to be the dominant game on this. Time will only tell. So, check back in a year or so, maybe I'll be saying something different. Thanks for checking out the video and hanging in there through this. I'll have another part up soon. If you want to find out more about me, my website is staglproductions.com. Thanks for coming. I'll talk to you soon.